Hi there, Richard Little, your land partner, joining you once again. I'm going to be speaking today about initial assessment and planning history. So what we look at during the initial assessment in respect of planning. So starting point for this is the relevant local planning authority planning portal. And armed with that and the location, the postcode or the address, then put it in a search box and it should come up. Now, lots of sites don't have a planning history. Lots do. And this is where we pick up our first bit of information about what we may be able to do and what we might not be able to do, subject to local policy. Now, if it has a history, that obviously depends on how recent any application was. You know, we're looking to see whether any application was approved, withdrawn, refused, gone to appeal, appeal upheld, appeal dismissed, any of those things. Now, if we find something with planning history, then however long back ago it is, could be back to the 80s, 90s, whatever, we will still have a look at it, but to a degree it's somewhat irrelevant. So we're really looking at recent planning history, you know, over probably not much more than the last 5 years. However, we will have a good read through this at some point. We might not do that all at initial assessment stage. So what we're really doing at initial assessment is just to find out if there is a planning history. So when and if we get into a conversation with the landowner or the landowners, we have got a much better idea of the site, and we can also test the landowners as to whether they're going to tell us about it, particularly if it gets turned down. We find that many do, but equally some don't, and some actually don't even know there's a planning history on something because it was perhaps before their time. So information that we're looking for at initial assessment really is there planning history? What is that planning history? As I say, was it consented? Was it refused? What actually was it? So if there isn't any planning history, what we look for is we will look for planning records, if you like, that are close by, or if it's not close by, for similar schemes that we think it might be. So if it's a 2 acre site, for instance, we might be thinking, okay, let's see what there is fairly recent in respect of, you know, anything 20, 30, 40 homes on a 2 acre site. And we'll have a little search through the LPA portal and see what there is, because that will give us an indication, an early indication of perhaps how that particular planning authority view sites of that size, or if it's not the same size in that location. So it gives us a bit of a steer as to, as I say, what difficulties may be ahead in the planning process. So go to the local planning authority planning portal and you type in the address and something comes up. So all we will do at that point is we will record, and generally for us it's a team member, so I don't have to do this myself. They will just record the links and perhaps a brief description of what that planning was. So you know, planning for 17 units dismissed or whatever it might be. So for us, it is just purely about gathering information. We do not do a deep dive into that information at this point. And one of the reasons I don't do that at this part of the process is the fact that as soon as somebody gives me a planning link, I can't resist getting on and starting digging into the planning files, etc. And then all of a sudden an hour's gone, and I've got all sorts of information that, quite frankly, might not be of any benefit at all unless we can get into dialogue with the landowner. And actually, you know, if we're already in dialogue with them, then yes, absolutely, we will dig a little bit deeper. So it does depend at what point we do the initial assessment. So as a business, as a team, we tend to do ours much later in the stage in the process than perhaps beginners perhaps should look to do. So beginners possibly should have this information before they actually start talking to a landowner. So not before you send out your letter, not before you approach anybody, but perhaps when you've had a reply and before you actually perhaps speak to them or meet them, you know, as actually, because you can then become a bit more knowledgeable about not just that site, as I say, coming back down to know what's happened in the local area. So you can have a conversation about, oh yes, there's a site up the road that's been approved or was approved 2 years ago or it was turned down. So it is a good way of you getting some knowledge and perhaps having a more credible conversation, a first conversation with landowners. So this part of the process is really, really important. At no point will it become a red flag. So it will not become a no, regardless of any planning history. So even if there's planning history on a site for 1 house or 100 houses, even if it's been turned down, that does not mean to say it's a red flag. What it means is that we will possibly look into that a little bit deeper to see whether we've got a different angle or whether we can come at it from a different angle in order to engage with the landowner to get them interested. Because if a site has history, then obviously, and it's with that present owner who you are talking to, then they've probably been through a certain amount of expense or a certain amount of, you know, emotional journey, should we say, in that whole process. Because most people, you know, we're not completely immune to it. We do get occasionally frustrated by the planning system. Largely we don't. Largely we embrace it, and it's all part of what we would consider to be a bit of a strategic game. But we understand that many stakeholders in this process, you know, get really, really frustrated by the planning system. And as I say, we're going to be doing a much deeper dive into planning and strategy and everything else, you know, in I don't know, in another 10, 15, 20 sort of sessions time, I guess. Not until we get to that point where it's relevant. So not too much detail until you actually need that detail. So as most of you know, planning is generally where we can add the most value. It often doesn't work out like that, and the planning process can obviously detract from the value, but as I say, we'll leave that for another day. So really, in sort of just purely in terms of the initial assessment, we've already said what we're going to do. We are just finding and noting what that planning history. So it is just about having some information in terms of having a conversation. As I say, you aren't necessarily going to do it how we do it, because we've been doing it a long time. So those of you that are a bit newer to this, it's actually quite good to read around the planning applications in the area that you're looking at, to get an understanding of the language, to get an understanding of perhaps what planning officers and particularly planning committees do and don't like, or more don't like. You don't find out too much what they do like. Effectively, if they don't like it, just accept everything else they do like. So it's good. It's a great place to find knowledge. So, you know, we're giving knowledge away at the moment, and there's stuff in books and various things, and you can go on courses and all that sort of stuff. But actually, you know, somebody with a reasonable, you know, a reasonable level of intellect, shall we say, will get an awful lot of knowledge from reading planning applications. Now, you don't have to go through all of the documents. So if I'm suggesting to you at initial assessment it's a good idea, then I would be looking for the report, the decision notice firstly, if there is a decision notice. If there isn't and it's been withdrawn, maybe a report. If there isn't a report, if it's been withdrawn or something like a design and access statement, and just a little bit about stakeholders or third-party comments, if you like. So, you know, particularly what a highways might say about it, or what a conservation officer might say about something in that particular area. So this is where you will get much more relevant information that is just about the area that you're in. Certainly through social media and say courses and stuff like that, you get a lot of information, but until you start working in an area, that's when it becomes, oh, it might be slightly different. And the slight differences is where either the benefit will come or the problem will come. Yeah. So just to conclude, initial assessment, planning history, just see what there is. If there isn't anything, just have a little look on adjacent sites or in the local area, just to sort of see, what may or may not be acceptable, perhaps on the size of land that you might be putting out, or the building, the conversion, whatever it might be. A lot of information there, okay? But like with a lot of stuff that's easy to find and free, people tend not to do it, and if I'm being honest, don't value it too much. We've proven to ourselves over a number of years that people will pay, and to an extent, the more they pay, the more they seem to value, which is a bit weird because it's got a high price doesn't mean say it is valuable. But when you start putting out free information, and there is free information, then most people, I would say, not everybody, but most people. No, it's free, and actually, it's too easy. I'll go on there and I'll get information. So all of the stuff that you can get on the local planning authority planning portal, every type of application in an area is in there. It's already been done before. Whatever you do and you think is unique is unlikely to be unique. So, use that as a resource. So this has been Richard Little, talking about planning history in the initial assessment, and I will see you again very, very shortly. Bye-bye.